Good morning. Let's begin by waving and greeting to our friends joining us via Zoom and Zoomies, waving to us. Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Lynchburg. That's still a mouthful. Here we gather in a spirit of freedom and friendship. Whoever you are, whatever your beliefs, whatever your age, and whomever you love, you are welcome here. As we work together for justice, compassion, and peace, we also acknowledge with humility that our buildings sit on Monacan land. My name is Gary Duvall. I've been a member of this congregation for 52 years, and I'm a member of the Sunday Services Committee. If you're with us for the first time, we are glad you chose to be here this morning to participate in the service for this church community that we love. We would be happy to tell you more about our community during virtual social time following the service. If you'd like to receive our monthly newsletter and Friday email updates, you can fill out one of the yellow cards in one of the pockets on the back of the seat in front of you and put it in the offering basket. If you're on Zoom, please fill out the newcomer connection form found on the visitor page on our website at uulynchburg.org. You may also wish to join our Facebook group. For those of you on Zoom, please note that the order of service is in the chat to the right of your screen if you're using a PC. If you're using a phone, the link is at the bottom of your screen. And I've been asked to say that there is going to be a Soup Sunday next week, and there's a sign-up sheet in Drysdale Hall that you can get to after the service. As we enter our time of worship, we light the flame of our chalice sharing these words. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, O Spirit of life. Our opening words this morning were written by Libby D. Stoddard. We gather together. Familiar words to many of us. We, called here not by name, not by special invitation, but we who are here who, by walking in the door, come in, who come anonymously, burdened and borne by our visions, yearnings, despairs, solitudes. Gather, called here not by law, not by outer compulsion, but by inward necessity do we come, alone or with others, casual yet intent, drawing in, drawing toward, drawing near. Together. This is the hardest, the most difficult thing, for within and without this building and in this room, we irk, frustrate, and anger each other at least as often as we lend or give support. Together is a place. Together is a way. Together is a focus, an acknowledgement that we who gather are seekers and are equal in our seeking. Please rise in body or spirit as you are able and join me in singing hymn 52, In Sweet Fields of Autumn.
I'd like to invite all the young ones and young at heart to join me down front for a story. Good morning. Hi. We have so many friends this morning. This is wonderful. I know, isn't it neat? So we have such a good book this morning. It's called A Visitor for Bear. Has anybody read this story before? No? Does anybody know the bear from this story? He has a lot of stories. Well, I know this story and I know this bear and I love his books. You know this bear? Yeah, the bear, he does visit the library too. Yep. I did. I get a lot of my books from the library. No one ever came to Bear's house. It has always been that way, and Bear was quite sure he didn't want any visitors. He even had a sign, "No visitors allowed." One morning, Bear heard a tap, tap, tapping on his front door. When he opened his door, there was a mouse, small and gray and bright-eyed. No visitors allowed, Bear said, pointing to the sign. Go away. He closed the door and went back to the business of making his breakfast. He set out 1 cup and 1 spoon, but when he opened the cupboard to get 1 bowl, there was the mouse, small and gray and bright-eyed. See him hiding in the bowl cupboard? Yeah. I told you to leave, cried Bear. Perhaps we could have just a spot of tea, said the mouse. Out, commanded Bear. Most sorry, said the mouse. I'll be going now. Bear showed him to the door and shut it firmly. Then he went back to the business of making his breakfast. But when he opened the bread drawer for 1 slice of bread, there was the mouse, small and gray and bright-eyed. Unbelievable, grumbled Bear. Away with you, vamoose. I do like a bit of cheese, said the mouse. Bear pointed a rigid claw toward the door. Yes, then, here I go, said the mouse. Farewell. And the mouse whisked out the door. This time, Bear shut the door very firmly and locked it tight. He locked the windows too, just for good measure. Then he again went back to the business of making his breakfast. But when he opened the fridge to get 1 egg, there was the mouse, small and gray and bright-eyed, of course. Be gone, roared Bear. A crackling fire? Ventured the mouse. This is impossible, intolerable, insufferable, cried Bear, shaking with anger and disbelief. Oh, terribly sorry, murmured the mouse. Now you see me, now you don't. I am gone. And the mouse looked very sorry indeed while he waited for Bear to unbolt the door and let him out again. This time, before he went back to the business of making his breakfast, Bear shut the door very, very, very firmly, locked it, boarded the window shut, stopped up the chimney, and even plugged the drain in the bathtub. Carefully, Bear set about the business of making his breakfast. He opened the cupboard. No mouse. He opened the bread drawer. Nothing. Whew. He opened the fridge. Mouse-free. Yes, indeed. He lifted the lid to the tea kettle. There was the mouse. Small and gray, and well, you know the rest. Bear fell to the floor and wept. I give up, he blubbered. You win. I am undone. So sorry, said the mouse, but perhaps if I could have just a bit of cheese and a cup of tea, and do you think we could unstopper the chimney and have a nice fire? Bear blew his nose with a loud honk. But then you must go, he sniffed. No visitors allowed. You have my word, said the mouse. Bear unshuttered and unboarded the windows, unlocked the door, unstopped the chimney, and unplugged the drain. He brought out 2 plates of cheese and 2 teacups, and he made a crackling fire in the fireplace for 2 sets of toes. The mouse warmed his feet and nibbled and sipped, and Bear did too. They sat for a long while. The clock in Bear's house ticked loudly. Bear cleared his throat. The mouse looked most attentive. No one had ever been most attentive to Bear. The fire is nice, Bear announced. Lovely, said the mouse. No one had ever said Bear's fires were lovely. I can do a headstand, said Bear. Very impressive, exclaimed the mouse. Bear told a joke. The mouse laughed heartily. No one had ever laughed at Bear's jokes before. Bear began to think of another joke. The mouse set down his teacup. Bear quickly lifted the teapot. There's plenty more, he said. So sorry, said the mouse. Most kind, but I must be on my way. Oh, really, you needn't go, said Bear. I'm off, said the mouse, springing up from his chair. Wait, cried Bear. But the mouse stepped out the door. Toodaloo, said the mouse. Don't go, wailed Bear, throwing his body across the path. But I gave you my word, said the mouse, pointing at the no visitors sign. Oh, that, cried Bear, pulling down the sign and tearing it up. That's for salesmen, not friends. Not for friends, added the mouse, small and gray and bright-eyed. Bear nodded. The mouse's bright eyes glowed brighter. Bear smiled. Do you like one lump or two? Said Bear most politely. I like two, said the mouse, and Bear agreed. Thank you. Wasn't that a good story? So it took quite a bit of time, but Bear did finally feel comfortable inviting someone new into the house, didn't he? And then he realized it could actually be a good thing. So this month, while we're talking about invitation, today we're going to be talking about inviting change and all things that are new. And maybe we'll find that new things and things that change can be just as good as Bear figured out that they were. So let's head upstairs and we will learn some more about it.
Talents and efforts of our many volunteers and staff, as well as the monetary support of our members and friends. If you found this church to be of value in your life, then I invite you to be generous as our morning offering is freely given and gratefully received. If you're on Zoom, you can find instructions on how to contribute at the donate link under About Us at uulynchburg.org. Along with the gifts of your time, work, and creativity, which also sustain our congregation. As together we give generously to support our congregation, let us also commit ourselves to a unity of spirit to make manifest a more just, peaceful, and loving world. It's our tradition to honor the whole of our lives, and so you're invited to share the joys, sorrows, and milestones of your. Our meditation this morning is entitled Solstice and was written by Gary Kowalski. Night has its own kind of beauty, different than the beauty of day. Night is a time of sleep and dreams and inward visions, a time of pause within activity. Darkness is an invitation to imaging and storytelling, and to using ears instead of eyes to listen to the world in its stillness. Darkness is the den of life in germination, and darkness is the portal of death that opens to eternity. The mystery of all time past and endless time to come. At the center of our being, there is light and there is darkness, the known and the unknown, the named and the nameless, the finite and the infinite. Light and dark are different, but not opposed to each other. Like a mother and a father, they are friends with one another and with us. Our speaker this morning is a longtime friend of this congregation, Anne Gibbons.
Gary, where would you like me to
Let me-
stand so I can be?
Let's just,
I'm pretty amped as it is, but this will make it official. Good morning. I'm going to go off script just a little bit because, well, first of all, I thought the children's book was wonderful. I spend a lot of time reading children's books to my grandchildren, and I don't know that I've read that exact one, but I thought, wouldn't it be great if that was the blueprint for immigration policy? We could all learn from that. And the second thing, before I begin, is I don't know how many of you are familiar with the podcast Soul Boom. Anybody? Soul Boom is the podcast by Rainn Wilson that most of us know as Dwight Schrute from The Office. And Rainn Wilson is just all about spirituality. He's Baha'i, and he's writing about it and speaking about it. And he interviewed a Jesuit priest named Father Greg Boyle, who works with gangs in Los Angeles. And he's written a book called Tattoos of the Heart. He's amazing. Anyway, Father Boyle believes that every single human being, including the homeboys, these members of these gangs, are filled with unshakable goodness. And I'm just looking out into a room, a chapel, a church filled with unshakable goodness today. And it feels really great to be here, so thank you. One of the most important things for a presenter when preparing remarks is to know their audience. Luckily for me, I have a pretty good idea of my audience or my congregation when coming to the First Unitarian Church of Lynchburg. You have been more than kind and generous in inviting me to join you over the years, and I'm always humbled and a little intimidated, both humbled and intimidated. You see where I'm going. But I did want to do a little homework and not take anything for granted. So, of course, I did what any self-respecting presenter would do in order to research, and I Googled your website. The first thing I noticed was that I indeed did have the date and the time correct in my calendar for the service today. Some of you here may remember a year when I sauntered in about half an hour after the service had already started. And yeah, it really happened. And having established that I indeed was scheduled for today, I was curious as to who else might be speaking here. Much to my happy surprise, I saw that Corey Barnes was scheduled for next week. Happy surprise because I've known Corey and his parents, Rick and Tina, for many, many years. Corey attended EC Glass around the same time as our own kids, and he played baseball with our son, Dominic. I admired Corey then for how bright and fun and kind he was growing up. So I went on to Google Corey and saw his many positive accomplishments. But what really intrigued me was his topic for next week, Inviting Controversy, which explores the importance of engaging in dialogue across divergent views. It will, emphasize the value of open-mindedness, respect, and curiosity when encountering different opinions, encouraging individuals to see controversy not as a barrier, but an opportunity for growth, deeper understanding, strengthening community. By fostering conversations that honor diversity and challenge perspectives, you can create a more inclusive and compassionate world. I won't be here next Sunday, but it sounds great, so you have a lot to look forward to. I was intrigued because my hope is that some of what I have to share today may lead nicely into what Corey has to offer next Sunday. The notion of non-dualism, or in my very basic and simple understanding, the idea of issues and situations and even people and relationships as being both and rather than either or. I don't remember exactly when I first came across the idea, the notion of both and thinking. It's been many, many years now. I only know that when I first read about it, a proverbial light bulb went off in my head. Suddenly, it all made sense. The many times I felt so conflicted and confused, disappointed and dismayed when I couldn't make myself be more consistent, when my thoughts didn't always align exactly evenly, when I had seemingly opposing feelings about an issue or a person or a situation or a relationship, and I just couldn't make up my mind. So how had I gotten dualistic either-or thinking so ingrained in my mind? I suspect it was part of my growing up and perhaps an inevitable and maybe even necessary and essential aspect of childhood. One of my favorite thinkers on this matter of non-duality is a Franciscan priest named Richard Rohr, a name that perhaps some of you may be familiar with. In one of his writings, Rohr explains that dualism is often the normal way the mind works. It knows things by comparison to something else. He goes on to say, I've checked that out with doctors who will say that's absolutely the way the brain forms. It knows tall in relationship to short. When you're a little 2-year-old, that's workable. I take care of grandchildren almost every day, and I try not to get into the trap of dualism too much. So I'll say things like, so with school, thumbs up, thumbs down, or thumbs in the middle. It's perhaps not surprising that they'll often give me a thumbs in the middle. Sometimes I forget, and then I play the either or game. The other day I was listing off either or choices for our not quite 4-year-old grandson, Wallace. Wallace, if you could only have cupcakes or ice cream for the rest of your life, which would you have? Wallace, if you could only play soccer or basketball, which would you play? This went on for a few more questions, and Wallace on his own asked, Gigi, can we play the both game? From the mouths of babes. Going back as far as my own college years, I remember having either or thoughts, like either I respect my parents' wishes and do as they want, or I disregard their guidance and simply do my own thing. Either I stay on the science track and become a physical therapist, I declared my major, or I drop out of college altogether because obviously I can't succeed here. Either I settle for this relationship because it's not terrible and has potential, or I break up and recognize I'm destined for the single life. When presented with the prospect of living a life of both and, everything began to turn around. I could both respect my parents' wishes up to a point, and I could recognize my own agency and autonomy as values that my parents actually gave me. I could both appreciate the relationship I had as teaching me valuable lessons, and I could move on with those lessons learned that would help me make better relationship decisions in the future. I could both recognize that I'm not good at science, which is important self-knowledge, and I could move on and invest myself in courses and disciplines that interested and excited me. I realized that living a more non-dual kind of life was healthier for me and ultimately better for the people around me. Which brings me back to you, my audience. Also, on your website, your congregation welcomes, and I quote, a wide range of beliefs, both those for whom the concept of God has meaning and those who find spiritual insight in humanism, earth-centered spirituality, Jesus' teachings, or no structural belief. You learn both from the very young and also from longtime members. You learn both together and individually. It's all over your website. It's no wonder I always feel so home and comfortable being here with you all. You are my people. When I entered the world of marriage, I was also tempted with either or thinking. Either my husband and I are going to live a life together filled with love and joy and happiness till death do us part, or we're going to meet insurmountable challenges and we weren't meant to be together at all. As you might imagine, after almost 41 years of marriage, we have had both more than our share of loving times and joy-filled seasons, and we have weathered some seasons and storms of loss and pain, difficulties and disagreements. Recognizing and embracing the ups and downs in marriage and other committed relationships has ultimately been life-giving, at least for me. As poet and author Ross Gay explains, what if joy is not only entangled with pain or suffering or sorrow, but is also what emerges from how we care for each other through those things? I love this quote so much, I'm going to do it again. What if joy is not only entangled with pain or suffering or sorrow, but is also what emerges from how we care for each other through those things? Navigating significant committed relationships will necessarily involve both difficulties and delights, both times of grief and times of gratitude. And working through those dark times together is part of what can bring the light. Another season of my life in which dualism made itself known is that of child rearing. When my children were young, if I was asked, is your child either obedient or wild, I would respond, yes. My child is both obedient sometimes, and my child can be wild at other times. There were times when the thought of being separated from one of my children both threw me into a panic, and those times also made me feel like I needed the break. There were stages when I felt both that my only real call in life was to be a mother, and there were times when I wondered if I even had what it took to raise a child. At every stage and every age, I had so many seemingly mixed feelings about parenting and caring for children. I both couldn't wait for them to move on to that next stage, and I didn't want to let go of whatever stage they were currently experiencing. Brené Brown, the well-known sociologist, sees it this way. It doesn't matter how the child you're loving came into your life and your heart. Everyone raising a child is intimately familiar with the pain and beauty of contractions, the rhythm of holding on tight and letting go. From wobbly first steps to college drop-offs, embrace, release is a form of life that can leave stretch marks on our hearts. If you are knee-deep in bittersweet this season, you're not alone. Both bitter and sweet, the life of parenting and caregiving. As I've aged, I've also found myself experiencing emotional non-dualism. I have been in the middle of both saying goodbye, as I had to do when my own parents died, and also hello, as I did when each of my 3 grandchildren were born. It was both the best of times welcoming these new lives into our world, and it was also the worst of times, losing my parents who I would never see again on this side. I found the words of author and poet Jessica Jocelyn to be helpful. I have one foot stuck in sadness, while the other foot is in the doorway to happiness. Parts of me dance in the sunshine, while the other parts drown in the rain. I am the one in the room who laughs the loudest, while the grief stings and pulls me backward. I exist simultaneously, both happy and sad. And at any given moment, either one can take over. Don't try to pull me one way or the other, because one can't exist without the other. Beyond our inner life of thoughts and emotions and our closest relationships, either or thinking has often dominated our larger outer world as well. You can't listen to a news report without a commentator mentioning how polarized and divided our communities and our country have become. Could part of the problem be that we've become too dualistic in how we see each other? In the words of the Dalai Lama, spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism, the Dalai Lama reminds us that we actually need each other with all our differences and unique perspectives. He says, our world and our lives have become increasingly interdependent. So when our neighbor is harmed, it affects us too. Therefore, we have to abandon our outdated notions of them and us and think of our world much more in terms of a great us, a great human family. What might political campaigns and debates look like if candidates were forced to come up with solutions together across the aisle for the good of all? Can we even imagine such a world? What would the tenor of our political discourse look like and sound like and even feel like if opposing sides had to acknowledge that competitors had both some views with which we might agree and some with which we would vehemently disagree? Could we find some aspect of common ground? As political campaigns gear up even more, all of us might benefit from taking a pause when we're tempted to lash out at the party or candidate not of our choosing. Bill Walls, a clinical psychologist and mindfulness meditation instructor, no relation to Tim Walls, not being partisan here, sees it this way. Over and over, dualistic either-or thinking cripples our cultural and political sphere. Non-dualism recognizes that polar positions are only the endpoints of one continuum, and that wisdom lies in recognizing that solutions exist in the space that connects the poles. He then goes on to list a variety of stances and values that are often seen only in an either-or light. Individualism and collectivism are not irreconcilable. Science and religion are not irreconcilable. Pro-life and pro-choice are not irreconcilable. Nationalism and internationalism, not irreconcilable. Personal incentive and social security, not irreconcilable. Industry and environmentalism, human rights, animal rights, not irreconcilable. The quality expression of each is dependent upon the quality expression of the other. We are all in this together. We are one species together with all other species on a limited planet. And a quality future for all requires the recognition of the connectedness of the needs and rights of each by the other. In reading through these seeming contradictions, I was reminded of a program I helped sponsor many years ago when I was a campus minister at then Lynchburg College. In an effort to promote dialogue around the issue of abortion, we brought in an organization called Common Ground. In the process, those who identified as pro-choice and those who identified as pro-life came together in search of some common ground around the issue. Ultimately, they landed on the importance of promoting adoption as a viable alternative. At the end of the night, no one had changed their deeply held views and beliefs, but they came to recognize that there were actually efforts that both could be engaged in with integrity and authenticity. More recently, I've become aware of a program called One Small Step that is currently operating in Richmond, where I live, as far as other places in the country. One Small Step brings strangers with different political views together to record a 50-minute facilitated conversation, not to debate politics, but to learn more about who we are as people. Created by StoryCorps, one of my favorite NPR features, One Small Step is an effort to remind the country of the humanity in all of us, even those with whom we disagree. I've applied to participate myself and hopefully will be matched with someone whose perspectives and opinions are quite different from my own. One Small Step conversations are not to debate politics, but to understand what experiences have shaped each other's political views or the role that politics plays in their lives. Certain ground rules help guide the 50-minute conversations. Number one, engage in active listening skills. Choose to be fully present, focus on what the other person is saying. Don't give in to distraction. I know for me, my biggest temptation is figuring out, what do I want to say right after they say whatever they say. Instead of listening to respond, as I tend to do, try listening to understand. Respond mindfully. Consider a follow-up question. Focus on learning from and connecting with your partner. When you think about it, these ground rules would be helpful in any conversation with those with whom we disagree about any variety of issues or topics. We don't need an NPR program to begin practicing helpful dialogues that bring together rather than tear apart. As you're hopefully picking up by now, I think that non-dualistic both and thinking and feeling can be applied to both the deeply personal and the expansive political. It can be both local and it can also be global. I want to conclude this morning with some thoughts from one of my favorite podcasters, Kate Bowler. Bowler is currently an associate professor of the history of Christianity at Duke Divinity School. She was diagnosed in 2015 with stage 4 colon cancer. Kate Bowler had the rug rudely taken out from her with her diagnosis, and she had a husband and a young son she adored and thankfully still does. Kate is currently in remission, though she knows the cancer could return at any time. Her experience awakened in her a desire to help give permission to people to have all the feelings. The titles of some of her more recent non-academic books may give you an idea of her philosophy of life. Have a beautiful, terrible day. Good enough, 40-ish devotionals for a life of imperfection. No cure for being human and other truths I need to hear. Everything happens for a reason and other lies I've loved. So hear these words of Kate Bowler. Hear me out. I don't trust people who say good vibes only. What about other vibes? Anxious vibes, sadness vibes, dysentery vibes. There is no good or bad emotion, As psychologist Susan David likes to say, all are just information. The problem is that we aren't allowing ourselves to feel the whole range of what is actually ours. You are a person to be loved, not a problem to be solved. All your vibes are fine. Grouchy vibes, miffed vibes, meh vibes are fine too. So to you, members of the First Unitarian Universal Church of Lynchburg, I wish that you might more and more embrace all of who you are, no matter what vibes you may be feeling today. May we celebrate the many extremes of our very days, both our very good days and our kind of bad days, both our greatest gifts and talents and our imperfections and flaws. And no matter where we find ourselves, let's plan to meet again somewhere in the middle.
Thank you, Anne. Please rise or in body or spirit as you're able, and join me in singing hymn 121, We'll Build a Land. As our service draws to a close, we extinguish the flame of our chalice as we say these words together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our closing words are written by Deborah Hafner. We are on a journey. We didn't plan it. We didn't have time for the bread to rise. We may find ourselves in the wilderness, hungry, thirsty, doubting that we should ever have come. But look around. We are not alone. It is our journey together, a journey to our better selves, a journey to a better world, a journey to a more promised land.